Hello and welcome to MK Econ. This video looks at cross-elasticity of demand, or cross-price elasticity of demand as it's also known. There are four types of elasticity taught on most economics courses, and this may well be the third type that you've been taught. There are three other videos to have a look at to help. So cross-elasticity of demand, or XED as it's also known, measures how responsive quantity demanded of one good is to the change in price of another good. Firms use XED to help them decide where to set price for different goods that are in joint demand. So this is the idea where you've got complementary goods and there's some sort of linking between these products. So they're in joint demand, a joint purchase, and they price so that they can increase their total revenue. They may also use XED to see the impact of price changes again by rival firms on their total revenue, or possibly vice versa. And then you might be linking into more offensive tactics. Governments use cross-elasticity of demand to decide whether mergers should be allowed to go ahead. And they use the data to check whether different products are truly substitutes for each other, so that if certain firms merge, would there still be enough substitutes out there for there to be competition and all the benefits hoped for from competition? So let's move on to XED calculations. So as an economist, you're practicing your reasoning skills and also your quantitative skills. This little bit is particularly the quantitative skills. And we start with a formula. So XED equals the percentage change in quantity demanded of good X divided by the percentage change in the price of good Y. So again, we've got percent sign, then the triangle sign for change. You can put that in words, just a little bit quicker putting the symbol. Important they're in that order. QD is quantity demanded. Here we've added a letter of X to symbolize it's of one good. And then on the bottom of that formula, you've got P for price and of good Y to emphasize that's of a different good. So you're going across these two different markets. Remember, when you're doing your calculations, one of the most common errors is to actually put the price data at the top of the formula and the quantity demanded at the bottom. So watch out for that. Here's the silly memory aid of Quacky Duck X sits on pond Y to try to help you remember. Do include that formula, as that's also your double check for have you definitely put them the right way around, and make sure you get into the habit of checking yourself all the time. So the maths is fairly straightforward. Again, it's just working out a percentage change. Use your preferred method, but you can use the one that's on the screen of change divided by original times 100. So fairly straightforward maths. So you're just slowing down enough just to make sure you're picking out the right numbers. And when you've calculated your number, make sure that you don't include the percentage. So if you've been asked to calculate XED, the final number, the coefficient, should not have a percent sign in. Also put it as a decimal. Make sure you include your workings. Make sure you make your final answer really clear by underlining it. So XED numbers that you've just calculated can now tell you the relationship between goods, and they can confirm that for you as a firm, as the government trying to decide on mergers. So it all depends on whether the number is positive or negative. If, say, XED is 0, that would mean the goods have no relationship whatsoever to each other. So that might be quite unusual to have that coming up. Maybe it's chewing gum and Tipp-Ex. There's definitely no linking, no competition. And then the size of the coefficient also shows how close the two products are to each other. So let's take positive XED first. So if XED is positive, that tells you the goods are substitutes. And that would make sense. That would show that if the price went up of one product, then you have, say, that's a positive on the bottom of the formula. You'd expect its rival, its substitute, demand for that to go up to some extent. So you'd have a positive on the top. So you've got two positives, matching signs, and ends up as a positive overall as well. So a substitute is where an increase in the price of another good causes the other good's demand to rise. These substitutes, they're competing with each other, they're rival. And beyond the size, if you now look at the size of the number, there's more that you can tell. So if the number is less than 1, and here it's always going to be positive, the goods are XED inelastic. That means that they're weak or poor substitutes. Whereas if XCD is greater than 1, the demand for the goods is really responsive. So XCD is elastic and you have close or strong substitutes. And a possible way to remember this is possible is positive, so possible substitute. So possible substitute seem like similar words to me. So let's move on to negative cross elasticity of demand. So here, if you have that happening, then you know the products are complements. So here, think of strawberries and cream. Say the price of strawberries went up, you might think people might have less reason to buy cream. So quantity demanded of cream may go down a little bit. So you'd have price going up, demand of the cream going down. So you've got mixed signs. So mixed signs means that you end up with a negative number. So a complement is where the increase in the price of another good causes the goods demand to fall. Complements are goods in joint demand. They've got this linking going on. And remember, same as with PED, even though it's a negative number, when you look at the size, just ignore the negative sign, put it in brackets, and then look at the number on its own. So if you have a number that's less than 1, you'd say the goods are XCD inelastic. In other words, they're weak or poor complements. Whereas if XCD is greater than 1, quantity demanded is quite responsive here. And so the goods are XCD elastic. In other words, they're close or strong complements. And I've got two sort of matching words again here to try to remember why, when it's a negative number without going through the reasoning, of nice complement. So wrong spelling of complement, but still works as a silly memory aid. So it's important to be critically alert as an economist and think of the limitations and problems with your initial theory and reasoning. So here's a memory aid of toes to help with that. So let's start with time. So if you have different time scales, say short run versus long run, you could expect to have different responses and you can reason why. Other factors may have an impact. So all the elasticities are very simplified models. There is only a change of one factor. So what if another factor changed? How would that impact? Watch out with this one though. If you're using these points for evaluation, read the question forensically. If the question had asked something like, examine a factor affecting elasticity, and you've already talked about one factor, and then you go, but it might not be that factor, and you think that's evaluation, it may well not be. Could there be errors? So might the data be unreliable? Is it historical? How long is it since it was collected? May have other events have happened that change people's responsiveness, so such as the pandemic recently. What was the sample size? Who collected the data? All sorts of reasons why the data might be biased, so unrepresentative of the market and mean that you make the wrong predictions. And finally, what's the size of the change in the factor? So responsiveness may depend on this size. You may well get to a point where the change is perceived as so large that the market responds differently to your initial predictions and data. All of these limitations provide problems for your decisions. So if you have predicted very, very precisely based on data, what's the consequence? It could mean that you've made the wrong decision and that scarce resources have been not used as well as they should. So let's think about some of the common errors with XCD. So with calculations, we've already mentioned swapping the numbers around in the formula, so putting the price, the percentage change in price of one good, putting that on the top instead of the bottom. Also errors in calculating the percentage change. So have you possibly got mistaken over which the original number was, or have you just put one number over the other and not put a change in there at all? So change over original, did you times it by 100? And then if you were asked to calculate the final XCD coefficient, did you accidentally put a percent sign in there? So watch out for those common errors. And if you're putting things into words, remember, and also in the formula, you have a default setting of PED. Always in topics that have similarities, the first part that you get taught, that's always the one that you've had done in the most detail and that you remember somehow most. So check, have you just put price in anywhere rather than price of another good? Watch out for that. It's very easy. We've now got different signs and different terms in there, so it's easy to get those confused, so watch out for that. And when you're writing the definition, just check, have you merged the formula and the definition and maybe got double changes in there so it doesn't quite make sense anymore? So time to have a go at some questions. Pause the video and restart if you want any tips, or go on to the next slide for answers. So for question 1, there's quite a lot of work to do. So it might be worth just emphasising which one is the price. You remember that's got, those figures are going to be put eventually into the bottom of your formula, and which one's the quantity demanded. Also, which was the original, which is the new. So that's all quite useful to make sure you're putting the numbers in the right way and not making any of the silly errors. So on question 2, I read this stem of the question really carefully. So the positive XED can be expected for which pair of goods? So it's positive XED. So at this point, I'd be really stressing to myself, it's positive. I've got a memory aid of possible substitutes. So use the memory aid, and now you're looking, or however you've remembered it, now you're looking at the options to, are there any obvious substitutes to help your choice? Then the last question, again, you're going to have to be aware of where the prices are, where the quantities are. I'm marking that up, which are the originals, which are the new, and then working through plugging that back into the equation. So have a look through these worked answers, maybe a little bit more there than you need for explanation. Take what you want, make a note of it, add it to your own answers. Things to possibly note, you'll see I've put down the XED formula, and you'll see in one case I happen to have used percentage change quantity demanded of X over percentage change in price of Y, and the other time I've used A and B. Either are fine. Note I've included workings, so I can go back and check, and if I make any errors later, I can still pick up marks for the workings. Note for where a number was part of the answer, I've tried to underline that to make it really obvious to the examiner where my answer is. And hopefully you should be able to see some precision in the writing as well. Hope this video on XED was useful. Thank you for listening.